All right. Hi, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to Zibby's Bookshop. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We are very excited to be celebrating the release of The Magnificent Ruins, by Nayantara Roy. That's important to get the name right, so that's cool. Magnificent Ruins. And she is here tonight with Crissy Van Meter in conversation. So welcome both. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We did a quick bio for both of them, but Nayantara Roy is the author of the wow, I can't speak tonight. Okay, this is a rough night. Magnificent Ruins, that should not be a tongue twister, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice novel of 2024, an LA Times Editor's Pick, a Washington Post Best Book, a People Magazine's Best Book, an Apple's Best Debut, a Hatchet Book Club Pick, and a Gold House Book Club Pick, amongst others, which is impressive because that's a lot. In 2018, Roy won the Rick the Marines Award for her short story 8C. Her plays have been performed internationally in the UK and India, and she's also a television executive at Starz, where she acquires and develops original scripted series. Roy lives in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. Thank you for making it all the way across the country.
That's right.
And Crissy Van Meter's novel Creatures was a Bellatrix Book Club pick, an NPR Book of the Year, a finalist for the Willa Literary Award, and longlisted for the VCU Cowell First Novelist Award. Her writings appear in Vice, Guernica, BuzzFeed, and Catapult. She holds an MFA in creative writing for the New School and is the founder of Literary Project 5 Quarterly and the contributing editor of 4 novella books. She lives in Los Angeles, where she is the head of books for Dakota Johnson's Tea Time Pictures. So enjoy. It'll be about a 30-minute conversation. We'll open it up to a Q&A, have plenty of books to sign, and I will leave it to you, and I will be turning this music off.
Oh, it was intro music. I thought we had it the whole time. We can keep it on. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On this beautiful book. We've been kind of emailing and hanging, but now we've become BFFs. So good luck to all of you, because we will be having a very annoying, intimate conversation for the next 30 minutes.
It's true. Crissy asks the most incredible questions.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a lot of pressure. I guess I just kind of start, I would love for you to read a bit. And maybe just before you dive in, just a few lines of, so everyone, if you haven't read the book, knows what this is about. And maybe we could just hear a little bit from you, because it's such a beautiful book and I'm obsessed with it. And I can't wait to talk about it. So
that is
to you.
The Magnificent Ruins is about Lila, who is millennial. She's 29 at the time we meet her, and she makes complex millennial choices. I'm sure none of you know anything about that, but with her lovers, with her career, with her relationships, and she's kind of just floating through life a little bit. She's successful, but she's letting life happen to her. And then one morning she wakes up in Brooklyn and realizes that her maternal grandfather is dead. What ends up happening is that Lila travels all the way back to India, but she's confronted with a lot more than paperwork. In this magnificent house live her mother, her grandmother, and a whole slew of relatives, all of whom love and are afraid of Lila's legacy. So she's got to figure out that journey, and she does, and she has to confront a few demons while at it.
That was perfect.
We talked about how I might screw that up. Okay.
She didn't, surprise.
A secret is a terrible thing. It starts as a single inhalation, a fragment of bacteria that enters your bloodstream, multiplying immediately or over centuries, 1,000 neural networks of secrets emerging from the first. As a family, we were long practiced in the art of secrets, trading one deception for the other through generations, weaving an intricate silkscreen that prevented the outside world from knowing who we might turn into. But that night on the terrace, confronted by the body that we had taken life from, I wondered if there would be no hiding this time. A secret is a terrible thing, unless there was honor in keeping it. Brooklyn, 2015. In the middle of that summer, I inherited my grandfather's house in India. There were 5 sprawling floors of it, home to my mother, my grandmother, and their extended family, 8,000 miles away from my apartment in Brooklyn. The first time my mother called that day was at 7:15 a.m. I let the phone ring through because we had not spoken in 14 months, and I was steaming my skirt, and I did not know yet that my grandfather was dead. It was my birthday, and I assumed that despite the countless others she had missed, this year she had decided that she would like to talk to me. It would not occur to her that I might be late for work if I stopped to take a call from a mother who had remained silent for 14 months. It was my mother's way to remain silent. We might have argued about a minor difference. I did not like stew, thereby her stew, or a crevasse of a grievance. At 16, I had allowed my stepmother to formally adopt me to be able to live with my father and her in Connecticut. Indian law did not allow a man to take his child out of the country unless he had a wife, that is, a caregiver. Nurture considered the prime function of femininity. After that, my mother had said, "My doors are closed to you forever," a favorite phrase which had meant 6.5 weeks at the time. The pattern, like the infinite loops of a familiar blanket, was always the same. No words exchanged until she had forgotten her wound. This worked in part. The long spells of quiet, whether weeks or months or once almost 2 years, served to charge the relationship, as a drained iPhone might gather battery from a socket. And then the phone would ring again. With the familiarity of old scars, we would slip back into Saturday evenings when my phone would light up, euphoric and neon. Hi. The first conversation would be stilted on my end, exuberant on hers. I would revel in a universe where my mother wanted me. Over time, she would begin calling regularly again. Those weeks would inevitably lull me, slightly tipsy from the largesse of her motherhood, into a maternal buzz. And then I would say something that would hurt her feelings, which always meant the punishment of disappearance. In this manner, we had passed almost 3 decades. My mother was not an old lady. She was beautiful and fragile and cruel in the way children can be, and she frightened me. That August was the hottest that Brooklyn could be. Sudden warm showers permeating the mugginess. There was more steam than air in the subway, bodies stacked alongside, the whole thing reeking of damp rage and hot dogs. I was the first stop on the L train after spending an hour on the 1. Williamsburg was filled with photogenic parents with bamboo strollers everywhere. I was finally earning enough to occupy their neighborhood, an aberration in a railroad apartment, the kind with a unifying corridor trailing from kitchen to bedroom to living room. You had to walk through every room to get to my couch and TV, the first class compartment, I like to say. It was around the corner from Williamsburg cinemas, and I had made it look like a real place, with rugs and books and plants. I was 29, and there had been enough cities and apartments. I knew how to make a cup of instant home. A few blocks from the water, there was an Indo-Chinese restaurant serving hot green chili sauce mixed up with glistening soy hakka noodles, vinegary chicken on top, exactly the kind I had grown up eating. The owners were descendants of Chinese migrants in India, Hakkas, who had settled in Kolkata over a century ago, adopting the goddess Kali as their own, intermingling woks and scallions with Indian spices and heat, creating the Gobi Manchurian marriage of my dreams. I had not lived in Kolkata since I was 16, and having the restaurant nearby was a whiff of jumbled, salty memory that I would breathe in as I passed by. Every morning, I left the house at 8:15 to get to work before Gil did. Gilead Edelman had hired me not long after I'd graduated from Columbia, where he had adjunct taught undergraduates for 2 years before leaving for a publishing job, and where I had spent 4 years planning the novels I was going to write after a bachelor's degree. Instead, I found myself reading the manuscripts that my classmates wrote, making notes on their revisions. Columbia had been filled with ideals and libraries and anger, and we were all trying to have some sex. In the stacks of Butler Library, I felt at home. Towards the end of senior year, I found myself a boyfriend from the graduate physics department and a job as a waitress at the cafe below his building. That first year after I graduated, I tried to write after my shifts. A few sentences here, a page there of what I assumed my first novel would be. It was a lot of trying to guess at what first novels might be. My mother called again that early afternoon. Lunch had blitzed past after a series of meetings, and the phone glowered again with the word "Ma" vibrating up at me as I bent over the manuscripts on my desk. When Gil had been promoted to editorial director at Wyndham, he asked if I wanted to be his editorial assistant. I gratefully shut down my many trails of Word documents and accepted the job. 7 years later, I was a fiction editor with an instinct for other people's work. My own stories were abandoned ghost ships. But when I read a sentence, I could see past its bad shit swag into its spine. It felt like luck that I had found a career that included me in the world of writers, yet gave me my own place, my little throne on the margins of their manuscripts. The writers, unlike my mother, kept in touch constantly. To my father and stepmother in Connecticut, rarefied literary circles meant as little as the long sentences we put in our books. They were attorneys with a shared love for paperbacks. In the evenings, they drank rum or whiskey, ate kebabs or a casserole, and put their feet up in front of criminal minds. Still, they extended many a loan and shoulder, turning up for book launches, drinking wine in corners, bewildered and loving. When my mother called for the third time, it was the middle of the night in India. It felt unbelievable that the idea of my birth, of my body aging until it began to resemble hers, was the reason she was impatient to reach me. But if it was, I was in no hurry to let her. It was her way, after all. Just as my mother pursued her silences, she was relentless in her need. A thought might take form, and in seconds she would be possessed by it, caught within the wheel of her imagination, spinning in unending narratives. Everything was enlarged in this moment. The phone lit up again. I answered. Hi, Seth. I had met Seth 3 years ago on a dating app. With the same impromptu vision with which she had transformed Wyndham's children's literature from preachy to astonishing, my friend and colleague Molly had signed me up for the app. I was single at 26 after a long relationship, and I had taken like a fish to the waters of solitude. But Molly insisted that I had gone long enough without any action. It wasn't healthy, she said, as if prescribing me an omega-rich diet of salmon and men. Besides, what if I forgot what sex felt like? And so Seth was the second man from the app whom I had gone out with. We had had dinner at a bar in Brooklyn, followed by good sex, which I had not forgotten how to have. I was confused by how handsome he was and by his interest in me. Seth was charming, if in a constant state of despair. In the weeks and months that followed, we continued to spend time together that held no promises. One night after dinner, I settled into his bed as he was brushing his teeth and looked at his bookshelf, a precarious teetering stack perched on a single slab of wood in the wall, which threatened to bury us as we slept. I reached towards the Mavis Gallant, to the white stack below it, which I knew was his new manuscript. Seth, I knew, was embarrassed to solicit me for both sex and a sale, and so had never asked his agent to send it to me. This suited me, but when I looked at the manuscript's first few pages that night, I was unable to stop reading long after an apprehensive Seth had fallen asleep next to me. The next day, sleepless, I went into the office very early and had an awkward conversation with Gil, outlining the circumstances. Gil had read half his manuscript by that afternoon, and that was how I became Seth Schwartz's editor.
It's always so nice to hear the author read it, because it's like I hear like such a different voice in it. I want to just kind of start out a little bit vague, and I'm curious where this all came from for you, and like what questions you were asking yourself, and sort of how you came to this, because it's a really rich novel, and quite literally there are so many interesting characters and this family and this mother-daughter relationship, and it's really rich, and so a lot's going on in here. So I'm curious where you started, the origin of this, and how this sort of came to be.
I was at Columbia doing graduate school, actually, with some of my friends who are populated here. And at one point, I was in the film and TV program. And at one point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a fiction writing class. Unadvisable, but I did it. And it was called Other People's Secrets. Such a good class. We read, how writers approach secrets. The idea of a secret is really compelling to me. Like if Crissy and I have a secret that transforms our relationship in such a specific way, but it's also the knowing of secrets and the not knowing of secrets, not being privy to something. And we did that for a whole semester. And then at one point, I had to write an essay as the culmination of the class. And a mother-daughter story poured out of me. And 7 years later, here we are.
That's okay. So mother-daughter questions were sort of, which,
yeah,
if you haven't read the book, the last I'm not going to give anything away, but sort of the last half even is just so moving and so interesting about the mother-daughter stuff. And I love that that's kind of the origin. I was wondering then too about family in general and sort of your take on how much you really explore this. I mean, the setup is so great. It's quite literally a house that she's inherited, and there's all these sort of levels and people living in it, which works so beautifully. But then there's all these sort of secrets on each level and sort of all these different relationships happening. And so you say you start kind of with the mother-daughter stuff, but then, you know, it's expanded over a grandmother, it's expanded over like this entire family, the grandfather, all these things. Like, was that it from the jump you knew after you got through the mother stuff, you were like, yes, this is a massive family that all of these secrets pour into each other? Or did that come sort of later as you figured this out?
Such a good question, because I was trying to write about these massive families in India that all sort of share. It's like a dorm, except that it's your own family, and everybody lives in the mansion together or in the house together. And there could be up to 50 people in one family.
Wow.
In India. And so when you then think about that in literature, my agent was like, no. So eventually, like, I had an author friend, Sunil Yapa, who was reading my work. We sort of compressed and condensed, and some characters became composites of each other and thought about what each character's function was to serve. And I sort of arrived at who the final 5 or 6 would be. But no, I wouldn't say I had that from the start. I did have Lila, her mother, and her grandmother, which feel to me like the beating heart.
Yes.
And the other thing I realized was that the whole family was one organism, and then Lila was another, and the juxtaposition of that,
I love that. I mean, I think of Lila, like, one thing, and if you haven't read the Washington Post review of this book, you should, because it's really great. And we were just talking about this, but the word he used was smitten with Lila, specifically in her voice. And I think there's something so magical about this being first person and being sort of this 29-year-old millennial, which at times is almost like humorous and silly, and there's a lot going on, but that voice is so strong. Yet all the other characters are really, really well developed in this family. And I was curious, besides Lila, because obviously that's kind of where you were going probably as the writer in this first person and felt connected, but who were the other characters that you really loved writing? Because there's so many interesting people in here.
I think the most fun was Biddy. If you haven't read the book, she sort of goes from being this young influencer that isn't really taken very seriously. She's got a great rap voice, but then she ends up playing a really pivotal part in the novel. And it was just really fun to write that generation that is hyper aware and extremely connected, and yet has all these deep, deep feelings that we bury. So she gave me a lot of freedom. Something about first person is that everything is in Lila's voice, right? So it was really important for me to give the other women in the family some agency.
Totally.
I wanted someone to read the book and say that, my friend Sunil says that the novel eschews easy villains. And that was just, I was like, okay, great. Because I think Lila's mother had to have a voice of her own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I wonder too with that first person. I mean, I'm probably asking this because I'm a novelist and need help, but I'm wondering.
That is a great book.
I'm wondering about that first person. Was that that's been it the whole time, or did you experiment in third person? Did you do that whole horrible thing where you try it in all different ways? Like, how was that process for you? Because that voice is so beautiful, and also we're able to get sort of the other point of views as well. So how did you get to that voice, and did it change throughout your process?
Such a good question, because I don't think anyone's ever asked it before. I didn't know enough about writing a novel to switch around voices. I did what my gut said to do.
That's usually right.
I did not know this. So, I will say I did tons of revision, but it was mostly in first person. That came instinctively.
Yeah.
But I tried those chapters that there are 3 chapters that go back in time a little bit.
They're so beautiful.
I tried those not in Lila's POV. And ultimately we realized that it should stay in Lila's POV, but give them some sort of agency. And the novel does switch perspective in one key perspective. And so I would say that if you like stories about outsiders and insiders, craft-wise, this novel has a lot of that.
Yeah.
As I've said in interviews before, 10,000 things for a debut novelist not to do, but it sort of worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually fascinating. That's the way you did it. I love that sort of, I think that's really interesting in writing. And I know you're writing other things and working on other things too, but I think that's such a gift for a writer to have like that sort of compelling voice to take you through instead of sort of meandering about. I want to talk about place too, because, part of this takes place in America, and then we go to India, and there's a lot happening there that I think if you were to just like be so into the family relationship, it's so well done that there's all these sort of things happening politically, but also in terms of just like the sense of identity of like who you are and where you're from and what it means to be from somewhere. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that because it's done so well in this, and it's sometimes subtle in such a way that by the time you get to the end of the book, you don't know why you're crying because there's so many things that have sort of happened. So I would love for you to talk about place in this and identity, how they're related, and sort of how you came to this actual place of writing.
Yeah. It's interesting because that first essay that I wrote in that class will be published later this year in a magazine under the umbrella of home.
Okay.
And I think for Lila, home is many different places and no places at all. Many of us come from elsewhere and build new homes, chosen families. We spent a lot of time talking about chosen families. That was not hard to do. Kolkata is a city that sort of captures my imagination in a very specific way. If you haven't been, nothing is more glamorous, more filthy, more underbelly, and beautiful at the same time as Kolkata for me. And that was easy to write, right? I knew the place in the world. The thing that I realized moving forward, which is I think what you're asking, is the story of Lila and her mom and the story of Brooklyn juxtaposed with a very faraway city is not so different from all of us. The problems between Lila and her mom are, and the secret of the book was something that I spoke to friends of Chinese descent, of African American descent, and we were all like, oh, I guess no one talks about these things. And that was really where the place that the book came from, the worlds that the book was trying to explore. But no, writing about that city, I could do it all day.
It's really beautiful. I mean, when you said glamorous too, like there's this feeling about it of like that it so well, but it just fits so sort of perfectly. What about then the mothers and daughters and the grandmothers? I mean, I think we'd all like to hear more about like, we've kind of brushed the surface here. It's about mothers and daughters and secrets and complicated things. And we all know that's complicated probably for all of us in some way. But how long did it take you to sort of come up? Well, and I don't want to give anything too much away here, but like, the idea of these secrets, I don't want to give it away. I guess how long did you always have the sort of exact plot of what was going to happen? Or did it come to you as you were writing and you sort of almost in a weird way started pulling from, the world, your own life, talking to other people? Or was it very clear to you what these problems were in this family from the beginning?
Yeah. The core of the book lies in the mother and the daughter and the grandmother, right? And that interconnected relationship, the things that they do talk about, but the things that they don't talk about, was somewhere buried in my subconscious because I have been around these legacy families and they're not so different from families everywhere where, you keep things private. Your dirty laundry, it's funny because my cousin wrote a book called Dirty Laundry that's probably on these shelves. Your dirty laundry is not everyone else's. And especially with families that take their social position really seriously, like the Lahiris. you really sort of look away. And I knew I wanted to write about that when I took that class. And I encourage all of you to take a fiction writing at any point in time to know what your subconscious is trying to tell you. It was really the impetus. And then I slowly started working on it. And initially it was just stream of consciousness. We cut all those 100 pages in the beginning.
So how many pages was this?
630.
You are a brain. Wow.
No, Kathy Porries. I have an excellent editor at
do.
Hachette.
Wow. So okay. So how long? So you said about 7 years.
Yeah.
And then how long cutting? How long editing?
7 years. I would say that the final version of the novel that my agent saw was about 550 pages.
Jeez.
And she's an editorial agent. I think that then became, when it went to my film agent, I think was 480.
Wow.
You know, so we were already in,
Yeah.
and then Kathy brought it down to whatever this is, 422 or whatever. And you know, the things that she cut were the parts I'd worked the hardest on.
Yeah, that's always always it.
The historical.
That's always it.
It's wild.
I feel like the more research you do writing a novel, that's what always goes, because it's like only for you. Nobody cares about all the stupid details that you've taken years to gather. They're like, great, just that can be one sentence, and you're like,
Cool.
Okay, cool. I'll just cut all that out. I spent 3 years researching this, and like, yeah, that makes sense to me.
It was wild.
Wait, you said, I didn't know this. Your family, you have a novelist in the family.
I do. My cousin is a novelist. Zibby loved her book, so it must be somewhere.
Wow.
She like lives in a little Irish village with her husband and her dog, and then wrote this novel that had deals in the US and the UK and TriStar optioned it.
Wow.
And like, yeah. And then my grand aunt was a novelist.
Oh.
Yep. And I read those books when I was very young and realized that you could write very deeply, you know, personal books and very beautiful ones.
So you've always wanted to be a novelist, even though that's not your day job?
I am South Asian. Nobody wants to just be a novelist in my family. But I certainly had that desire right out of college. And my dad was like, absolutely do it in your spare time. And then that's what I did. You know, my day job has a lot of story in it, like we were talking about. You know, I work with writers, but being on this side of it is a coming of age.
I want to talk a little bit. We were briefly talking about this, but
because we're both executives.
Yeah,
so,
it's
yeah,
you know, working
novelists.
full time and writing a novel feels so stupid, because you're like, why am I doing this? It's like a hobby.
That's my boss, all right?
Yeah, sorry. It's my but I do kind of want to know a bit about your process. I think for all of us who are taking on any kind of other part of life, a creative endeavor or hobby or passion, you know, what is it like for you to work full time in a demanding job where you are actually using your creative brain a lot of the time? How are you able, I'm asking this just for myself at this point, but how are you able to sort of turn off your brain and then work on this book?
Yeah, you have to really, really, really want to. There's no other way to do it. I am very tired. But I think the way I did it, and you know, I read once, Graham Greene used to do this, and Nell Zink said it, where if you do 500 words a day, if you write 500 words a day or edit 5 pages a day for 5 days a week, it will get done.
Yeah.
Will it take you 7 years? Probably.
Yeah.
But I followed some modicum of that. I'm A-type. And then, you know, the hardest parts were earlier in my career when one of my first bosses is here, where you have to do everything and sort of like really, you know, that you can't really write 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. because you're on call all the time. As you get more and more senior, you sort of can make your own hours. So
again, I'm talking about this. It's so fascinating. And I mean, again, congratulations to you, because I think there's so many people that have a real life, you know, where we all are American. We have to work all the time. And to even sort of get this far and have this really beautiful thing is really cool. Can you talk a little bit about your day job for all the people out there? Because it's a really fascinating, cool job. And I want to know specifically, is it hard to be creative at work? And then like, do you have anything left?
Yeah. Well, the left part is the important part,
Yeah.
right? Well, my day job is I'm a television executive, which means that I will sort of hear the pitch. So if you're very famous, I'll buy the idea of a cocktail napkin. But if you're not very famous, then I'll hear the pitch with scripts and whatever. And then we'll buy the show and I'll oversee it through development, meaning the scripts, and then it'll go off and shoot, and it comes back to me for notes on the cuts. That's fairly involved. It's very busy. And it is, listen, I've been a TV executive for a good number of years, and I've said this before, where I'm seasoned. I know how to do that job, right? Every day is a terror, depending on the climate, but it's still like, I know the rough way it works.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about the way a novel works. Like, it was terrifying. I wrote so much garbage to get to this, and like I needed advice constantly. I needed hand holding. I needed babysitting. So I would say, if you've got a novel in you, make sure your friends are really ready for it.
That's really fascinating. The community element
Yeah.
to being an artist, obviously, is really important. When did you start showing this to people? Like really early on, or did you wait?
So different. Also, with my second book, I really sent it out. My friend Kate here has read it. Like, I sent it out early to a whole bunch of people because I felt confident that I could show it. I sent this to only one friend. Some of my dearest friends did not know that I was writing a novel for
years.
Yeah. Years. Because when you don't know if it's any good,
You have a second book.
I do.
That's very exciting.
Yeah. Same editor, which is such a blessing. Summer of 2026.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. I want to ask you just a few fun questions. Well, I think they're fun. Who's your all-time favorite writer?
Vikram Seth. That's easy. He mattered the most to me growing up. He is a British Indian author who was the first person to really write global literature in that way. And I felt very rootless / global by the time I was writing that novel. And he's just, if you haven't read An Equal Music, he's more famous for A Suitable Boy. But if you haven't read An Equal Music, it is just the most melodious love story. I will one day make that, I mean, it's the most, I've yet to read prose like that. That's just so light and beautiful. You would love it.
I will read it. What was your favorite book when you were a kid?
Probably something bleak and terrible, or Jackie Collins, like whatever I could get my, yeah. Silas Marner, I think. Oh, Secret Garden.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like Secret
Well, that's
Garden.
dark. That's very dark. I recently just rewatched that movie, the one from the 90s.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. And I remembered as a kid, like, oh, this is my favorite movie. And I, like, last year rewatched it, and I was like, how did they make this film?
I know.
It's really messed up.
And my parents let me read whatever I want.
Yeah, same.
Like what?
Yeah.
Well, this explains it.
Yeah. The darkness.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then what's your favorite film of all time?
Blue Valentine.
Mm.
It's a really fun, chirpy, lighthearted movie. And my professor was involved in making it, and he told me it took him 9 years. I know.
9 years. That's depressing.
But it moved me. It showed me what the power of cinema really could do. I mean, it lets you never want to have a relationship after watching that film, but it just is such a, like, you're really in the belly of the beast. You are moved in ways that you didn't know you could be, and I think that's the power of that medium.
Okay, so not one of your own TV shows that you've produced. What's been one of your favorite TV shows, recent TV shows, that you always recommend?
How recent? Because I love The Affair.
Oh yeah,
the
great.
first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of like territory I think I love. The inner landscapes of men and women.
Well, yes.
What have I watched recently?
I feel like this is a mean question because you know if you just ask anyone that, they're like, and you've watched like a million things, but really you can't remember anything.
I loved Jane Campion's Top of the Lake. Not very recent, but I think we don't make enough. Oh, I loved Baby Reindeer.
Oh,
but I would put those two together. Another lighthearted, beautiful, like watch it on a fun night.
Watch it on a plane.
Don't watch it on a plane. Yeah, but we don't make stories like that very often, which is what Richard Gadd, I think, said during his Emmys, which is we don't take enough risk anymore. And I get it, but man, when you take a good risk,
do you hope this gets turned into TV or film? I mean, you know the ins and outs. Yeah. But can you talk about that just a little? I know we kind of talked about it a bit, but I think having the perspective you have versus, whenever I work with students or mentoring someone, the first thing they say to me is like, oh, I wrote this novel so that it'll become a film. And I'm like, wow, don't do that. Like, terrible idea. Yeah. But with the perspective you have, would you want to adapt this? How do you feel about that?
Do you hear that often from students?
All the time.
Why don't they just write film and TV instead?
That's what I said. I'm like, you're in the wrong class. Like,
it's going to take them years to write
and then years to get it made. So like, yes.
Yeah, that's the thing that we know, which is like, May over there is having her show made, but that's like, that just never happens.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
like, if someone options this, and we're taking meetings now, it's like, bye, I'll see you in 20 years. I'm sure you'll make it at some point. I'm sure I'll have grandchildren by then. But that's how I think. And
in a mansion in Calcutta.
And then if it gets made next year, well and good.
Yeah.
I'll be there to watch the movie, not on a plane,
I think that's like again, because you have the perspective, but again, just talking to people who write novels, and I really do hear this a bunch of like, oh, then I want to adapt it. I want to do that. And I'm just like, okay, great. Good luck. And it's such a crazy process. So I think that's really exciting that you're kind of just like, if it goes out into the world and becomes something great, and you'll focus on writing other novels.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've spent enough time with this one,
Yeah.
And
it's not yours anymore.
It's not. That's something you realize as a novelist. I think eventually it's just not mine anymore.
Yeah.
Goodreads will drive that home really quickly.
So are you checking your Goodreads?
I'm Goodreads curious. I want to be Goodreads sober by the end of this. But I was telling Crissy that there was one review within the same hour. There was one review that was like, I love this so much. Like, this is, and not a family member, just a stranger. Like, 3 chunks of paragraphs. The next review just said on and on and on. And I was like, I hear you, sister.
I think when more time has elapsed, you can go back maybe after a martini or something, and it's like fun to read them because it's people are like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's like, this person should die. This is so bad. And you're like, wow, like it just is like insane how people do that. But I mean, honestly, it's been very well received. How does that feel? Does it feel like surreal to be doing all this?
Yeah. Anytime they talk about me in the press, I leave my body immediately. You've just done it for longer, and it's I have no idea who they're talking about or speculating about or like
it's very, very very weird. Well, I mean, it's such a beautiful book. I know probably a lot of us have already read it or kind of tapped into it, but if you haven't read it yet, I promise you will need a tissue by the end, or a few. When I finished it, my husband heard me in the other room, and I was like, and he's like, what's going on in there? And I was like, just alone with like a flashlight finishing it. It's really, really beautiful. And I know we're all really, really excited for you. But I do want to open it up to all of you, because I'm sure, well, you probably know most of everyone here, but let's take some questions.
Hi. Doing something so big and beautiful for the first time at this stage in your life, I'm just curious what you learned about yourself, either as a person or as an artist in this process.
That is my friend Allison.
That's a great question.
I think I learned that I can do it, which is the greatest gift of all. Like I didn't exactly sail into the second novel like, oh, I got this. But I knew if you can do a hard thing once,
Yeah.
you always have the ability to do a hard thing. It's sort of like when my therapist is like, but you've been there before. You've done that. You got this. She's very good. It's like that.
Yeah.
If you've swum the English Channel before, you've done it once, and that gives you wings beyond anything else. Similarly, if you've got your heart broken, you kind of have, that you'll survive it.
Mhm.
So, or maybe not.
Yes,
but-
do you? I love that. Anybody else? But all these people. Okay,
I
yes.
have a lighter, sillier-ish question. Was Connecticut,
Mm.
the reference to Connecticut, was that a choice you made based on the idea of secrets? Like, was that sort of like a creative, metaphorical choice for you?
Because you're from Connecticut.
Yeah.
It's funny because my brother-in-law is now from, my brother-in-law is from Connecticut, and we just went to my sister's wedding. Did you know Connecticut is full of very handsome young men and beautiful young women? Like you walk into a
No.
bar and everybody's just like a Hallmark movie.
Wow.
It's the
Isn't that where
oddest thing.
Martha Stewart lived?
Yeah. And then we passed a construction person, and it was like a movie. He was that handsome. And it's like, this is ridiculous.
So we all are going to Connecticut?
But it captures my imagination because it is also such the epitome of whiteness in so many ways, and sort of having moved predominantly in white circles since my 20s, very often I'm the only brown person in a social situation because of how film and TV is structured and how certain schools are structured, and that it felt important to find a place that was so far removed from Calcutta. What's the opposite of Calcutta?
Well, definitely the opposite.
Could you explain, please, the way, how, and why you chose that name for the book, especially the word ruins? I haven't read it yet, so, but I kind of understand what's about.
It's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. I don't know. It came to me one day, and that was that. I was like, the magnificent ruins. And there, obviously, I've thought about it later. And the second book's title also came to me in a very abstract way. I don't know where. I think you just, as creators, have to rely on your subconscious in a very specific way, because whatever comes knocking in the night, you got to open the door, And I think like that first word or the second word, magnificent, is so different from the word ruins. And in so many ways, obviously, the house was both, right? She refers to it over and over again. But so is her relationship with her mother,
Totally.
And, I just didn't know when I was doing it. So,
So I never wrote the book.
Yeah.
So a name of a book comes later while in the process, or at the end, in the middle, like you said, one day. It's not that, I'm going to write, that's the name of the book, and you start writing. It doesn't go like that.
No, it came to me at some point early. This one, I'd be curious to hear your perspective. And the second one, I knew before I started writing it, because I'd sat with that story for a long time. I knew that the word sisters would be in it and the word half would be in it. And then the combination of that came to me. Because spoiler alert, the book is about two half sisters. And it's called Sisters of the Halved Heart. So I wish I had a better answer. Maybe you do.
I think it's different maybe for everybody. I can't even remember now. I wish I had that where it just sort of comes to you. Mine always come at the end.
Interesting.
And I'll end up kind of going through the prose and finding lines that I really loved, or words or places or something, and sometimes that will inspire it. But mine always end up coming at the end. But I'll always have like a weird project name that never makes it like I'm working on a book now called Lizard, but I'm not going to sell a book called Lizard.
You might sell a book called
I'm
Lizard.
sure that will be
If
it's just like
anyone
that's
can-
the name on my
yeah.
desktop. So
I mean, if anyone can sell a show called Baby Reindeer,
yeah,
you can
point.
sell a book called Lizard.
yeah, maybe I'll keep it. But yeah, I think for everyone it's different.
We have a question. As someone who knows your day life and knows like your time, I don't know first of all how you found the time to book. Very excited to read it. I've not read it yet, but I'm curious. Like in television, I know we get so attached to character, and you see them; they become real people to you. Were you able to let these characters go? Do you still think about, dream about them? Do you see different stories for them, or did it feel complete? Like, how did you know it was time to stay?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think because Lila finds closure in the end. No spoilers there, but I think closure might be the happiest ending of all for Lila. I was able to let that story go. You know, the book was certainly came from a place of intimacy where I was familiar with those worlds and those legacies and the trauma that the book has. You know, the book is also about inheritances that aren't just houses and boxes, they're what runs in our veins. It just once it was done and once Lila had reached closure, for me, I had reached closure. But as a television executive, my brain works differently. You know, like in a novel, I never want to read this book again, except to people. You know, it's just been too many times. You know, by the time you finish editing a novel, it's been so you've literally read that book maybe 30 times.
Yeah.
You know, so
at least,
yeah. If not more.
Nightmare.
Yeah. You should tell your students that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just curious. Like I know sometimes when TV shows end, like more and
Oh.
book I have. I wonder what happens next. I just wondered if they connected with you enough. Like still thinking about what's going to happen to these people.
But every time I make a TV show, and I imagine this is the same for the two of you, I've watched a million cuts of each episode. I never want to see. I'm not like busting out the popcorn on a Friday night to watch that show, you know? So I think it's kind of the same with it, you know? But I love the premieres, you know? Anything that's fancy is nice. Yeah.
You had a question.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. As someone that day to day gives notes, what was it like to receive notes?
Wow.
And has that influenced how you give notes?
Wow.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think I give notes from a perspective of like, I've done this, you know, early in my career, I would not give notes alone, right? I learned how to do it from very capable people. And I now feel like I have a handle on it. Giving a constructive note, constructive criticism is maybe the hardest thing in the world to do. Also giving a firm note, you know, that's a no, you know. Taking it is a little harder. They love to kill your darlings, my God, you know, but Kathy is a genius of an editor. And I've never hard disagreed. I've disagreed, but I've yielded because I read it after that and I'm like, damn it, she's right again, you know? So it's a much more vulnerable position.
It's also one-on-one. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're talking about like TV film, right, you have a lot of people weighing in. It's a very collaborative thing, but like it's so strange with a novel because one, you are doing it alone and then you're really just you and your editor, which is a totally different relationship maybe than that note process with like a bigger collaborative team maybe.
Yeah. And mine is really a pleasure, right? I don't know that I'm as much of a pleasure to take notes from as she, because the world of TV also looks like, it's like chop.
Yeah.
We had to do this yesterday. Okay, and it is a little more, I mean, I have so much respect for television writers for that, you know. But novels, you know, we sit, we think, we hopefully, you know, arrive at different places. Does that sort of answer it? It's a really good question. I don't know that I have the greatest answer.
So are you a pantser or a plotter?
You know, there's an episode of a show, a podcast that I love called Writer's Routine, and I am their latest episode. And it literally is that. He's this British dude who figured out that all people want to hear about is whether people are pantsers or plotters. Pantsers are essentially people who, you know, I'm going to write this novel and I'm going to do it without knowing what the end is. Or, you know, I may have a general idea, but I'll just go for it. And plotters are people with outlines and structure and like, I can't tell you how A-type I am as a human. I need that structure. I don't do anything without a plan. And like outside of the things like falling in love or whatever, like the things you are in control of, like you don't do without a plan.
Caveat.
Yeah. But I had an extensive outline for this book. I knew I wouldn't be able to handle that much thing. And then I kept revising that outline as the book went on. It seems like you know what that feels like. And that was just I did that for the second one as well. And I think I encourage television writers to do it now. I am like, get a hold of the season, and then this pilot will look a little bit different. Get a sense of the whole before the sum of its parts. You know, so A-level plotter, like plotter to the max.
How long was the outline? How many pages?
20.
Wow.
Ish. Yeah. I got in there. But I wrote the rough version of it I was in Mount Shasta.
Beautiful.
I was sitting in front of a river and I was like, I'm panicked by what the magnitude of this project is. Good God, what have I done? And I had a friend reading who was like, just get it down on paper. And that can change. Just get it.
But did it change much?
Okay, so
sorry.
It's few things stayed the same. She went from Brooklyn to Calcutta. She inherited a house. The story was about 3 generations of women. And someone dies in the end, unexpectedly. But everything else was, I would almost say Biddy's character is entirely like, it needed to exist. And so it came about. The fact that she raps, stuff like that, they're just like specific things come. But I had a sense of the whole before going in.
And the structure then too, you knew you were going to take like those chapters that
go
back in time a bit, and those are really beautiful. So that's interesting that sort of was not in the big general thing, that sort of came from within as you were writing. It needed to happen.
And
so you're not as type A as you're saying.
Yay. There's a POV shift in, I want to say, one of the final few chapters that really bring home the idea of an outsider versus an insider. And it came to me, I had just read a detective novel.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, oh, that's the way to do it. Not that it was a device, but the idea of bringing someone like that in.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering, do you like writing? Or do
That's the best question.
It's a very good question.
Having written?
Do I like writing, or do I?
Do you like writing, or do you like having written?
Having, yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Philip Roth went to his grave being like, I hate every book I've written. I don't know. I think I really, really enjoy the process, but Ruins was terrifying because I didn't know if it was any good. I didn't know if it would ever see the light of day. You really have to love it, I think, to be able to, if publication is what you're after, or a TV show,
run.
I'm afraid you've got, it. So I would say, I think even Philip Roth must have loved writing, Was it excruciating in parts? Like we talked about one of your projects that felt excruciating at some point. And the chapter that sort of Lila can only bring herself to measure in objects, right? That was a hard one to write. How do I get at it? How do I get into it? And that came to me, but it was excruciating for a while. And that's the time to move a muscle, go for a walk, drink a martini, whatever it is you need to get through.
I like that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, thank you so
No,
so much.
What a lovely conversation.
Congratulations to you. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you, Crissy. And Crissy's book is really beautiful
Oh.
as well. The DNA that runs through our books are,
Yeah, kind
there's
of telling
a
stories
through
together.
line.
Yeah.
So get your hands on a copy.
Well, we have plenty of books up here. If you guys want to buy some books, we'll have you guys here to sign.
Okay, thank you. I'm rereading. I drink so much water.
It's because you're talking a lot.
Yeah,
It's like teaching.
I love conversation. So right.
I love this book.